Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Brunel Cuppa Science event. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Simon Taylor with us today. Thank you very much, Simon, for being with us and for playing the game. Simon is a professor in computer sciences and the Vice Dean for Research in CLEPS. He has a number of other research hats, and I'm not going to mention them here. We're going to talk about that a bit later. And Simon, before arriving in the buzzing London, you actually were in the depth of Yorkshire. You have done a Bachelor in Industrial Studies in Sheffield, and then a Master in Computer Sciences. This was followed by a PhD at Leeds Metropolitan, also known now as Leeds Beckett. And your PhD was about parallel computing and simulation of manufacturing. After that, you stayed a little bit at Leeds Metropolitan as a lecturer, and then you arrived in London, first at Westminster University. That was in '91, and they had a very well resourced computing unit, so that was really good for you, a fan of computers and simulations and network computing. And only 4 years later, in '95, you've actually joined Brunel. And after that, this is now history. This is how we know Simon on campus, close to Wilfred Brown building. But of course, Simon has other hobbies. And here you can see Simon, or at least Simon's ghost, in a Hillingdon theatre, the Compass Theatre, where he was part of a company. Can you tell us what you were playing here, Simon?
A ghost.
The ghost, and the name of the play was?
It was a Terry Pratchett comedy called Weird Sisters. Basically, it was a pastiche from Macbeth. So I was playing the effects for the ghost of Macbeth, which was wonderful fun. It wasn't serious, shall we say?
Right. And what was the budget for this? Because I can see here the Christmas. If this is a Christmas tree, it's pretty much naked. So there must be a low budget there.
That kind of blew the budget.
Right. And I'm sure you got your excellent, entertaining presentation skills from those days in a theater company, right? So also, we always say that our hobbies during teenagehood are very important, and they might actually dictate what we'll do later in adult life. Well, Simon was fascinated by computers at a very young age already, and he had, I think one of your first computers was this Spectrum here. I'm not sure which one you had, but the entry level Spectrum, they had 16 kilobytes of RAM. Imagine that's not even enough to contain half an email. So that is very interesting. When this is Scopus, this is your Scopus, and when you look at your expertise, of course, it's about simulation, about distributed simulation. You somehow surfed on the World Wide Web trends and putting computers together, probably to improve simulations. We'll talk about that a bit later. Modeling and microgrids. We can see that since here in the middle, since you joined Brunel, your citation index really goes up. And that's probably because in 2005, you had a EPSRC funded network so that you could bring industry and academics together, and that got you to be known in that field. You're very good with computing networks, computing grids, but you've also been very good at having co-authors, having friends writing papers with you, and you have, depending on the website you are looking here, you have 150 co-authors, but I've seen, I think it's Google Scholar says that you have more than 200 co-authors all over the world. So you're very well connected. And you're actually really pushing it with the simulation topic. as far as having your own journal. So in 2006, I believe, you co-founded a new journal, the Journal of Simulation. And as you do when you are a chief editor, you publish the very first paper in the first page of the journal. So edition, so the number one, volume number 1, page 1 to 6 was you, and was Robinson the other co-founder?
That's right. So, yes, yeah.
Perfect. That's how you should do things. Perfect. And that brings me to, I'll stop sharing. That brings me to the first question for you. How did you, what brought you to simulation, to using computers to do your simulations? And also in parallel to this, I'd like to bring in here this often dichotomy between teaching and research. And I do believe that you got this passion for simulation through one of your teachers at university.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche, but I had a really good teacher in my undergraduate degree. I did a module on operational research. And I've been trying to remember the package that we taught, but I think it was a precursor to a package called Witness, the very basic thing in those days, because we're talking sort of mid to late 70s. But I do remember that. I do remember learning about queuing networks, and I found that quite interesting. But of course, in parallel, I was wasting a huge amount of time playing computer games. And it kind of, I kind of twigged towards the end of my undergraduate degree that it'd be kind of fun to start using that interest in the real world, you know, particularly manufacturing systems. I mean, I remember doing I got a paid job to do a time and motion study at a local factory in Sheffield, which involved sitting and counting the number of operations per hour, which is not as fascinating as you might guess.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it was valuable data collection and built a simple model based on that. Yeah, I mean that kind of interest started. So you know, interested in all sorts of games, and then discovering operational research really sort of kicked me off. You know, got me going.
And so, really, what was the breakthrough in your career? I mentioned around 2005 when you joined, around 95, sorry, when you joined Brunel. You had this EPSRC network grant, which allowed you to bring around the same table both industry and academics. So you, at the time, you had the impression that simulation was only dealt with, or there was a big need within the industry, and academics were not inputting towards industry enough?
Well, it was a very interesting time. So if you look at practitioners at the time, they were using computer tools. And I mean, we started writing it in 1999, actually, got it funded in 2000. And then we managed to keep the network going for 5 years. But really, it was looking at a lot of bright people using computer-based, Windows-based tools. Windows had just started a few years prior to that. And they were doing a great job, sort of, you know, modeling coffee production at Nestle, for example, or engine production at Ford. However, at the same time, there was this thing called the World Wide Web. There was these other concepts, grid computing, high performance computing, etc., and they were entirely passing simulation modelers by. One of the reasons was that the tools didn't allow them to access that kind of thing. Another reason is that when you looked at academic writings at the time, they were completely opaque to end users. So a field I was working in at the time, distributed simulation, which is where you take large scale simulations and split them across loads of computers. If you took one of those papers and gave them to my colleague at Ford, for example, John Ladbroke, and said, John, I've got a great idea, why don't you use it? He'd say, you're kidding. If I then said to him, your models are really slow, do you want to speed them up? He'd say, well, yes, I want to, but I don't understand that paper you've given me. So it's kind of, we started down the path in 2000 trying to do technology transfer between academia and in industry. And that, through the network, got me on the map because I was doing things useful to industry, and made me popular with colleagues, academic colleagues, because I suddenly found them a load of stakeholders to play with. So, you know, it was great for both sides of the fence.
So this network approach, is that useful mainly for access to a lot of data, or parallel computing really to go faster, as you just mentioned?
Well, not really. It was, oh, sorry, network in the sense of people network, a collaborative network. So I've just come out of a high performance computing centre at Westminster, the Centre for Parallel Computing, which is still there, and I still work with them. You know, that they had what were very big computers at the time. You know, things have changed since then a bit because computers got even bigger. But it was a shortage of relevant real world problems. You know, so at the time in my field, there was lots of good academic research and lots of good industrial practice, but they were all almost completely separate. So it was kind of, well, can we take this in academic practice and work with stakeholders to find real problems that we can apply academic practice to and get kind of tweak it so it actually does real things, you know, rather than sort of academic, how can I put this, theoretical work. You know, how can we take the theoretical, make it more relevant to real world problems, and then try and go forward together. So that's essentially what that network did, and that's what EPSRC networks are all about. You know, bringing people together. So it was a great start once I got that going, and I haven't really looked back since.
Mm-hmm. And that is, of course, reminiscent of all those initiatives, current initiatives to bring you know, interdisciplinarity within research, and you've actually done this quite a long time ago, or already. You know, all research councils are talking about this. So, what do you think was this the spark that industry brought to research in academia? Then was these real world problems?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, and to be honest, it didn't work all the time. But I mean, to give you one example, we got interest from a company near Reddish called Seika Solutions, and they were suffering from a problem that a lot of companies that do simulation do. That simulations take a long time to run. So they heard something or read something or came to a meeting that I ran about speeding up simulation. And they said, well, yeah, we are very interested in this. Now, they're sort of allied with talking a lot is I really strongly believe in demonstrators. So we got, I think it was about £8,000 from a initiative, I think it was called Grid Alliance. It was running in London and the South East. So a small amount of money. I bought a bunch of laptops and projectors. I grabbed the nearest PhD students who didn't run away too quickly, Nav Mustafi. And I said, right, let's take what you're doing and apply it to a real world problem. So we built a demonstrator which showed essentially the same model running on 4 computers in parallel, crunching through a whole load of work. And we took that on a little roadshow, but we demonstrated at Seika. Seika had Sellafield there as well. Sellafield, that is a very large user of simulation, said, yeah, we like the idea of this. And they basically started to part fund with Seika a new high performance simulation facility that we co-designed. And that was a big break. And arguably, if I hadn't done the EPSRC network, I wouldn't even got onto the same page as that. But it's because I was sort of demonstrating real world relevance, trying to solve real world problems, and trying to sort of show all that in something that was meaningful rather than sort of sort of an arbitrary irrelevant model. Then they bit, and I'm still working with Seika today, and Sellafield are enjoying the benefits of having their own high performance computing facility there for simulation. So that's 20 years later, you know.
Right. And for the naive, the non-computer scientists amongst us, so simulation, of course, needs this real world input, this real world data, so that you can learn. The computer has something to learn from, so that you can better simulate your outputs. What happens with those new industries, or perhaps in healthcare, if we don't have enough history to look back to feed the computer with? So could you imagine simulations without having to train?
Now you see, this falls into my favorite topic at the moment, AI and simulation. So if you don't have data, you can't really use AI techniques. If you've got simulation, well, you're lucky. So you can build simulations from expert knowledge. You can build simulations from qualitative knowledge, so that you're approximating a system that you strongly believe will work in a certain way. It's unusual not to have some data, but if you haven't got data, so let's say we're building a new hospital facility, you'll have an idea of how many patients are in there. You'll have an idea of some idea about waiting times and things, but maybe not accurate historical data. But you can use those to build stochastic distributions, and you can populate your simulation with these distributions that when you're running this simulation, effectively you're rolling dice, to say, right, when does the next patient arrive? I'll roll the dice, the next patient arrives in a minute. Roll the next dice, patient arrives in a minute and a second. Roll again, so you can use those to build up a statistically valid, say, input queue of patients, and do exactly the same thing for processing times. So whereas AI is kind of very in at the moment, as we all know, and enjoying a big audience, in simulation we've been kind of doing that since about 1958. So I think the first work was done by KD Tucker at British Steel in Sheffield, and we've been carrying on. So a really fascinating area of research at the moment. So I can see on this, I think I can see Hui and Anastasia on the in the window somewhere. We're talking about trying to merge AI techniques and simulation techniques, and it's leading to some very, very exciting optimization research that's going to be equally beneficial to both fields and, of course, end users. So end users who don't have data can build models and use these techniques, and of course AI people who do have the data can benefit from the structural benefits of simulation. I should be waving a flag at this point,
So you are part of STAR. You are adjunct director of STAR, and this is about digital tools, digital health. And of course, you see there is a strong future of simulation and AI in digital health. But where do you think this should? What is the direction that computer science should take in healthcare? Do you think it's about public health? Is it about improving the financial aspects of healthcare, or do you think it could also be used for tracking how a disease evolves within an individual? So talking about the virus, the viral load, for example, and simulating those aspects. Is it mainly all three of those?
Oh yeah,
or one in particular?
All of them. I mean, there's been an interesting thing in computing over the last few years, which is the Internet of Things as well. So what that's done is enable all these algorithms and programs running on computers to get data in real time from sensor networks, then in theory apply some sort of controlling action. But the fact that we're getting architectures now that bring simulation, AI, IoT together means that we have these things called digital twins, which a lot of people use, usually incorrectly, I have to say. But you can do some really interesting things with them. Now, if you go back 20 years ago, when I was running an EPSRC network to bring new technologies effectively to simulation modelers to get better defined problems for academics to solve, it's kind of the same thing here. I mean, what I'm excited about with the STAR Centre is that we have the ability to bring stakeholders in and listen to their problems and then tailor technological solutions to those problems, try and articulate that in a way that the end users can get rather than, complex computer science or computing terms, and then try and go forward in partnership. So we don't go away and solve a problem. We try and bring people together and then co-design and implement solutions which are of benefit to other people. So I could say I could come up with a really nice way of solving the NHS's financial problems, but I don't work in health. I haven't got a clue, and it'd be completely wrong. I'd much rather work in partnership with stakeholders and get the problem right and give them something that they'll actually be able to use. And
you follow the same approach with industry all the way back then, where you actually fed your simulation models with real-world problems. So it's somehow listening to the industry to inspire your modeling, and the same as here, we would be listening to the patient's needs and practitioners to come up with the most tailored digital health tools for them.
Yeah, I mean, give you an example at the moment. We've got anaesthesia landed in our research group, a very big pandemic grant, which was actually funded before the pandemic, ironically. And there's lots of modelling and simulation tools in there that are being led by Derek Garone and herself. And a lot of those come from listening to stakeholders' needs. So using modelling for bed management, for example. I heard on the grapevine this morning that we've got another stakeholder group interested, which I believe is from Tunisia, of all places. You know, so but I mean, what's good is that simulation at Brunel's is one of the longest running research groups. I mean, we've been here in some sort of form for about 25 years. Actually, with Ray, I think it probably was 27 years, and we've got a great track record, and it's sort of now that, because we're known, we get people coming to us to help sort out problems. So recently we had a company in Austria that do warehouse simulation. They wanted to cloudify their simulations and get them to go faster. So they came to us for some advice, and we've got a new research project starting there.
And so this, at some point in your career, you came up with this industrial standard, again, around distributed simulation. Can you tell us a few words about that?
Yeah, that came from the network again, the EPSRC network. I mean, if anybody's interested, if you Google the Group Sim network, you'll find it. But one of the issues there was distributed simulation is a very, very complicated network protocol. Sorry, it's based on a very complicated network protocol. It's a standard called high-level architecture. And I never tire of people saying, well, the HLA, the high-level architecture, solves everything. Well, it doesn't. It's just another tool. So the standard was basically a way of capturing best practice to use that tool for manufacturing simulation. Just out of interest, I don't know if anybody remembers when our email system crashed back in, I think, 2009 or 2008. We had no email at the university for 3 weeks. It was great. I wrote a standard.
Good. That reminds me of all the papers we've been writing during the pandemic.
You indeed.
But what would you have done without www, without World Wide Web? Is it possible to do distributed simulation, microgrids without that?
Ah, you see, you're coming into my world now. So we very often talk about layer cakes in computing. So it's in the sense of a network computing stack. So you kind of got applications at the top, and all the way down at the bottom, you've got the physical networking layer. The World Wide Web is kind of closer to the top. Interestingly, most of the things that we use are underneath the World Wide Web. So we use internet technologies essentially, which is a gross oversimplification of what I'm talking about. But it's we use things that kind of standardized in the 70s. So if the web never happened, we'd be okay.
Good.
The rest of the world might have suffered a little bit, but we'd be fine.
And so how do you use your simulation computer modeling expertise to build digital infrastructure in Africa? So you've received significant funding to build digital infrastructure in Africa, and what were those projects about?
Well, it's the link, if you like, is we back in the, I'm trying to remember now, sort of mid 2000s, so 2006, 2007, grid computing, which is basically a computational technique, a networking technique to link together huge amounts of computing resources to effectively throw at applications. Grid computing was transitioning into this thing called e-infrastructures, which in the UK sort of branched off to be e-science, and a lot of the open science stuff we talk about now is kind of a product out of those initiatives. I positioned some of the research we were doing as industrial applications of e-infrastructures. The European Commission really loved that because e-infrastructures were kind of academics only at the time. They liked that there were industrial examples coming out of my research group. So I got invited to various events and things, and eventually I became part of a consortium called Belief 2, which were writing up case studies of effective e-infrastructure use in industry. Around about that time, my new friends in Believe 2 and I bidded for a project to assess the value of e-infrastructures in Africa. We got it. The others chickened out, and I ended up being the coordinator. And through that, I made some very, very good friends. It was at the time, it was a very exciting time, because I think at the time there was only one African National Research and Education Network. And what I mean by that is we all don't know that we have Janus, which is the UK one. They provide us with networking, basically. These NRENs, National Research and Education Networks, I think there was only one in Africa, in South Africa, and the rest were starting to emerge. And I got involved at that time, and the funding we've had is basically enabling to take all that expertise in developing e-infrastructures for computer simulation and helping these emerging NRENs in Africa to adopt best practice for very basic networking services. We worked initially with the Ubuntu Net Alliance, which they're responsible for 12, I think, or more countries in East and Southern Africa. We got to know them very well. In fact, we linked up with them, I think, the year after they were founded. And then more recently, we've been working with the Western Central Research and Education Network, WACRN, particularly their chief, Professor Boubacar Barry, and the Chief Technology Officer, Omar Oyeye. We've been continuing to work with that, and it's quite exciting. So I think we've landed a 4-year early career academic training program over 8 countries in Africa, which is based off the back of all this. But yeah, so it's effectively all goes back to me thinking, let's have an EPSRC network on new technologies for simulation, and it's literally all come off from that. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's fantastic, fantastic. And you are defending open science a lot, and I can see how useful that has been for you in the past. You needed access to a lot of data, and you mentioned a lot of those papers were quite opaque. Not that they were not accessible, but also the data wasn't available. But then if I bring that together with and playing the devil's advocate here, I bring that together with your simulation expertise. And some say, one of the dangers is that you are feeding a computer with all the publications, all the data, and then the computer will simulate future research, perhaps. And what is this place here? Is there a space for us humans in generating ideas? There's already some research has been done where you could use AI to find a gap in research. And
well, yeah, I know those, and it's Ray Paul, who was a professor here some time ago. He sort of rebooted computer science and set us on the path that we have now. He coined the world's worst acronym, SINSFIT, which is simulation is no substitute for intelligent thinking. And that applies on virtually everything I do. So AIs can come up with good ideas, but they're just suggestions. It's up to us with our creativity then to exploit them and work with people and make them a reality. So it's a nice idea, but I don't think we're anywhere near sort of science fiction films where we're being made redundant yet.
Good. And that brings me to your role as a Vice Dean for research. What's your main plan for the college?
Well, it's interesting. We've just had we're going through research centre reporting at the moment, so we've asked everybody to report on research groups and research centres, and what's coming through is something that reflects an incredibly vibrant research community in our college, being led by extremely experienced people and by younger and energetic and exciting people. And really, if I've got any plans for the college, it's trying to figure out how to harness that to bring people together, to bid for grants, and get more research money coming in so we can do more research and carry on doing all the exciting research that we're doing. The one bugbear in this, of course, is PhD students, doctoral students. And it's something that I want to try and, I'll never crack, but I'm looking at all sorts of ways of bringing more doctoral students into the college. If at the end of my term I've got if the world knows CDEPs in a better way, knows what we're doing in a better way, so there's a bit to do with about fixing the shop window so the world can see us more easily. If I get us talking, get more collaborative stakeholder-based research going, and I can figure out some way of bringing more doctoral students into the college, then I think I've done an okay 4 years.
That's great. That's great. So I have now a few very short answered forced choice questions for you. And you can elaborate a little bit on those words. And what do you think is the most important, biological experiments or biology, an example where there is a lot of data collection experiments or simulation? So data, real data or simulation?
Can I say both? Because we need real world data, but we also need models to put that data in context.
Using your simulation hat, do you think the major output in the future years is going to be for industry or for healthcare? Don't say both.
Well, I'm going to say
what you will do.
There's a lot of industry in healthcare. It's I always found working in healthcare difficult, but the healthcare has the more worthy problems in some ways. And if you look at the experiences of my department and say my research group, our research group, the group I share with Anastasia and Derek, there were some fantastic responses to the pandemic. So the group built new models to help local hospitals to try and figure out how to cope with this unknown situation. And it's also helping us to think about how to build models for the future to help us feel more secure if there is, or rather sadly, if and when there is another pandemic. So I do like working in industry because it's more structured, but healthcare is fun and challenging, and ultimately it's going to have the best knock-on effect to the well-being of all of us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Microcomputers or giga computers, those ginormous computers?
This is like saying, do you like cells or do you like whole human body? It's kind of, I see all that as a continuum, so you've got tiny computers doing a job locally, linked up to enormous computers doing the big brain stuff. And there's exciting research in both. I mean, personally, I tend towards seeing the whole world as a single computer and thinking creative ways of wondering how we can all use that to make our lives better.
But a ginormous computer in one single place, or a network or smaller computers? What do you think would be more ecologically friendly, perhaps?
Well, they say infrastructure business. It's a network of small to big computers across the world.
Right. And I asked this question to everyone. Teaching or research?
The answer I've got to give. I love research, but judging by the reaction my students get on my course, I've linked my course to my research as best as I can. And I love being able to tell them about all the successes that I've had over the years and how that relates to the subject area. I mean, that photographs is a giveaway. I love research and I love a performance, and it's great being able to do that in front of students.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you've been inspired by one of your teachers in doing simulation. So somehow, research-led teaching is something very very important. And in a few minutes, I'll give the floor to the audience if they want to ask a few questions. So feel free to start firing in the chat, and I will get to this in 2 minutes. Maybe one last question for you, Simon, is that you mentioned doctoral researchers. What do you think, what would be your advice for ECRs, early career researchers, and what would be the future in your field?
So get involved. There's various community activities we run in my field where doctoral researchers get to meet the great and the good of my research area in informal ways. So we've run very successful PhD colloquia over the years. Now, what I'm talking about is the Winter Simulation Conference, which is my main conference. And that's been great because the students come in, they meet professors who've been in the fields for, for a long time. And they always come away saying, well, a friendly conference, I got some advice from X, I got some advice from Y, and they feel quite inspired. And then they feel comfortable enough in keeping contact, and gradually they build their own little, collaborative networks. So, it's a model which I think works across the way. It's sort of how, somebody just starting, a kind word here, a bit of interest there, from people who have been established in the field for a long time is really, really motivating. And you never know, by stopping and saying something at a poster saying, I think that's really fascinating, that might just inspire that person to do more work, and then might end up being a future colleague,
It's about visibility and networking. And you mentioned, how can CDEPs be more visible? Are you planning on some, how is this networking taking place at the level of the college within universities?
Well, we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, I don't want to deflect this, but we're going to talk about this, the College Research Strategy Group, next meeting in November, because it's all right me saying it. It's just, I want to get the heads of departments and directors of research behind me as well. And then, one of the issues here is recognizing that people have got very little time to do this in the working week. So it's trying to look for opportunities to reduce all the non-productive things we do as academics. And I could start listing off a whole bunch of things that could be more streamlined, could be more effective, and it's not teaching and it's not research. And if there's ways of reducing that to give people more time to talk and spend a bit more time over a coffee developing a research idea, then great.
Mm-hmm.
But sorry, I'm saying we're going to start a series of talks. We've got one coming up in November that's going to get advertised soon, which will be a panel sharing experience on winning a U grant. So I want to get lots more activities like that going in the college, a lot more research centres doing that kind of activity as well, and just keeping the conversation going, really.
Yeah, so that looking at the chat and the question, it's somehow along the same lines as what Akram here is writing. How do we nurture and develop a research culture which enables us to discuss ideas within college?
Well, we're launching the early career academic training program, so that's not going to be the solution to everything, but it's one thing. And that's really cool, because that means we've got a pilot this year, but it means from next year, people who join us at Brunel will meet Jeff, will meet the vice deans for research, they'll meet a whole bunch of people in an informal atmosphere to chat. And we'll all be doing exactly the same thing. We'll be listening about opportunities to link them into other people to work with. But it'll give them the space to develop their own research plans with some positive mentoring over a period of 6 months, which hopefully they'll get them plugged into Brunel and get them off to the best start possible. And we're also thinking about ways of doing that for mid-career academics, maybe to help them get going again, or to go bigger, or whatever. But again, it's keeping talking about this. So if anybody got any bright ideas that's on this call, then get in touch, please. I'm very happy to help. Happy to hear them.
That's good. That's good. So Joe is asking, co-design. Question about co-design can help in academia, and Joe asks if you can share what's the biggest lesson that you've learned while co-designing, maybe the biggest challenge that you've encountered, that you had to overcome, or a particular approach that you've used.
So sorry, I'm laughing because this anecdote is usually a lot ruder. But the polite version is, this goes back to when I first started working with the Ford Motor Company. So working with a bunch of surly engineers who had no time for anybody and suffered no fools. I learned very quickly that the best, as an academic, the best thing you can do is shut up. Listen very carefully, and then start to try and articulate your thoughts in their terms. Because you can't go in and just say, I know everything, you should listen to me. You got to learn the language, learn the non-verbal signs, learn the sort of, the soft skills stuff. And then, ideally try and figure out who's in charge as well, really in charge, and then start developing your solutions on their terms. And I strongly believe once they bite, they see that you're actually trying to be relevant to them, then certainly in that situation, they get the teeth into you. They say, we like you, we want to know more. So it's my advice is shut up and listen.
So going back to the beginning, it must have been really difficult to bring together at the same table industry and academics. Well, because at the beginning, academics somehow had to be relatively silent and listening to the needs of that industry, and sometimes completely different language.
I have to say, unfortunately, I had two very senior colleagues who wanted to take part. And they were very good at actually talking to stakeholders. So they were they were very helpful with advice. But yeah, it was difficult. And I think the reason why that got off the ground relatively easy is prior to that, I spent about 3 or 4 years doing presentations at the operational research conference. Because I originally, arguably, I started off in operational research and parallel computing, but I spent a lot of time getting out there to stakeholder meetings, industry meetings, and being brave and presenting something. And being absolutely blunt, I made a complete prat of myself to begin with. But I learned, and then I came back and gradually sort of built up my communication skills. And I was lucky. I found one problem that I knew how to crack, and I cracked it. And then I did more presentations to industry forums. And they liked what I said, and I managed then to get in the car and drive around and do demonstrations, literally drive around to a lot of places. I clocked up a lot of miles in those days. And they liked it. I introduced a free technique to them that they could use to save money in their job, which, would you believe, is effectively what we're using now. But this is back in the, when was it?
In the 90s.
93, 94 sort of time, 95, so net metering was the tool I was advocating to save money. It worked. So when I said to them, do you want to know more? Do you want to have more? Do you want to do something fun? They said, yes, we'd like to. So, but it's because I did the hard work. I did the 3 years traveling around, getting it wrong, then getting it right, and then off we go.
That's good. We have another question here about your projects in Africa, if you've encountered barriers in relation to their culture and beliefs.
Not really. Well, yes, but not insurmountable ones. So not going near any politics or anything like that. One of the issues was, how do you tell some very, very bright people about the benefits of something that they have no context for? So this was distributed computing infrastructures, call it what you want. So one of the tricks was actually trying to boil that down to sort of artifacts of that, which would be very useful. And luckily at the time, Eduroam was emerging, the ability to go between institutions and sign on remotely. And we use that case study to communicate the benefits. And one of the problems in Africa is access, and being able to go to a local facility to access another university's facilities was very attractive. So again, it was listening to their problems and trying to articulate something of use to them. And we got better at that. So, online databases, data repositories, we identified that as a main thing, which now is a no-brainer. But in those days, it was not a common thing at all.
That's good. So we have no more. Do we have a last question here in the chat? In the meantime, otherwise, Simon, it was really great to discuss with you today. So I'd like to thank you again for your time. Thank for the audience for the time and their questions here at the end. And yes, hopefully you keep your essential accessory here for next time. We'll welcome Jim Daunton, who is an entrepreneur, a design entrepreneur, and he's our new joker in residence, somehow trying to have some deconstructing ideas on research to try to stimulate new research ideas. So that's what we are going to talk about next Wednesday. So again, thank you very much, everyone, and keep flying the scientific research flag very high, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.